Thank you. Welcome everyone joining us. We're going to get started in 1 minute. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us on this virtual meeting to talk with Montgomery County and the City of Takoma Park about our climate action plans. This meeting is being streamed and being recorded, so please take note of that if you have your camera on or off, your preference, and please keep your phones, your microphones muted. I will also mute lines that have noise as needed. As we go through our meeting, if you have questions or comments, please do use the chat. We will be monitoring the chat, and as we go through our presentations, there'll be time after both of them for discussion and for questions, and we'll get through the questions in the chat box and then go to live questions after that. I'm Gina Mathias, the City of Takoma Park's Sustainability Manager, and I am so pleased to have this conversation about what the municipal role is in the county's climate action plan. And as we are working so hard in Takoma Park to reach our goal of net zero by 2035, I know Montgomery County has been working very hard to develop their plans to reach 100% reductions in emissions by 2035. Very similar goals, not exactly the same, but almost the same. And I'm very pleased to have with us tonight the Takoma Park Mobilization Environment Committee. And with the Environment Committee, I have David Blockstein, who's going to make some comments. David.
Great. Thank you very much, Gina. We appreciate the opportunity to be partnering with the city on this event. The Takoma Park Mobilization Environment Committee is a voluntary community of Takoma Park and adjacent area residents. We are part of a larger Takoma Park mobilization, which is a consensus-based organization that works on key issues of social justice, environmental justice, and related activities. The Environment Committee meets monthly. We have a listserv that is open to anybody who wants to join us, and we encourage participation. With respect to the event for tonight, it's very timely. Both the city and the council through their, the city council and the county council through their legislative bodies have recognized the reality that we are in a climate emergency, not just locally, but globally. And a climate emergency requires major action. It doesn't necessarily require action without thinking, however. And so both the city and the county each have been involved in processes that are data-driven, that are planning, and that are reaching culmination at this point. Each of the entities, the City of Takoma Park and Montgomery County, have also been acting as they plan, but clearly we all know that we need to step up our game if we're going to meet these ambitious goals. And so we're excited to be here today to applaud the work that has been done and to be catalysts for the work that needs to be done. With that, I will introduce our county leader, Adriana Hochberg, who is the Deputy Chief Administrative Officer for the county. She is the coordinator of our climate change efforts. Adriana has a fabulous background for doing this in terms of having worked both for the Environmental Protection Agency on the federal level and the District of Columbia in helping to implement their climate and sustainability goals. She's led the planning effort for Montgomery County, and I'm sure that she is as happy as anybody to be at the point now where she can be talking about a draft climate action plan instead of shepherding 5 working groups and 2 consulting firms and communicating with everybody in the county. So I'll turn it over to Adriana, but I just want to personally thank you. I've enjoyed being part of this process.
Thank you so much, David. I think you may have accidentally given me a promotion today. I am an assistant chief administrative officer, but not quite a deputy. Okay. But thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you, Gina, for inviting myself and members of the climate team to present to the Takoma Park community. Takoma Park is a leader in this work, and it's great to be your partners in this effort. My colleagues, Stan Edwards and Doug Weisberger are here, and we'll be co-presenting. Just as I get ready to share my screen, I'll let you know that this is normally about a 35-minute presentation, but we're going to be blazing through it and give you the highlights in about 20 minutes or so. So we'll be skipping through a couple of slides fairly quickly, but happy to go back to them, at the end if there are any specific questions on anything that we may have not gone into in depth. All right, we're ready for business. So the Climate Action Plan, draft of which was publicly released just about a month ago, is the county's strategic plan to cut our GHG emissions 80% by 2027 and 100% by 2035 and reduce our climate-related risks. The plan also identifies the county's largest and growing climate hazards, and there are 4 of them. I'll go over them in a moment. And it includes 87 prioritized actions for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and reducing climate-related risks. Those actions cover 7 sectors, including clean energy, buildings, transportation, adaptation, sequestration, public engagement, and governance. It's an integrated plan in that it looks at both, greenhouse gas emission reductions as well as climate adaptation, and it centers racial equity and social justice front and center. As you're probably aware, the climate planning process was spurred by the County Council's emergency climate mobilization resolution, which set these ambitious greenhouse gas reduction goals. The plan includes our vision for building a healthy, equitable, and resilient community. And it also includes a number of climate planning principles, which reflect our fundamental values as a community, and our development was guided by these principles. We engaged residents, businesses, and community organizations in developing the plan, and organizations from public, private, nonprofit sectors were involved in the planning process, and the draft Climate Action Plan reflects their input. With that, I'll transition to Doug.
Racial equity and social justice are central to the CAP, just like they are in the Takoma Park Sustainability and Climate Plan. And there are a number of maps in the CAP that highlight this, and the recommendations address vulnerabilities of those communities who are disproportionately vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. On the left, our consultant spatially mapped CDC's Social Vulnerability Index to highlight areas in the county where we'd anticipate residents are more susceptible to the detrimental impacts of climate change. As you probably know, there are many factors that go into the Social Vulnerability Index: living below the poverty line, no high school diploma, single parent household, people of color, crowding, speak English less than well, etc. The map on the right shows the energy burden in the county, and the red shaded areas indicate census tracts where the average energy costs are 3% or greater of a household's income. This is of great concern, of course, if we're having increased number of high heat days and folks have a high energy burden. There's going to be that wrenching choice between running the air conditioner or dealing with the intense heat to save money. And on the heating side, we know that heating oil is more costly and dirtier than electric heating. And we know that many elderly Black residents on fixed incomes are concerned about this very issue. The solution is converting to cleaner and more affordable heating to enhance health and equity. But of course, that then raises the issue of upfront costs associated with making the conversion. And we try to capture these types of issues in what we call the equity enhancing measures for many actions throughout the CAP. And I see that Takoma Park has a column in its plan that essentially does the same thing. Next. And so we just make it pop a little bit here. This example of an equity enhancing measure, a B2 electrification code requirement for existing residential buildings. Don't know if you can see it, but under co-benefits, there's a very negative score because the costs associated with the electrification conversions could impact the availability or price of affordable housing, and the cost could be passed on to renters. So we flagged this in a shaded box, suggesting prospective measures to ensure that we're not exacerbating inequities. While there was some diversity among the 5 work groups that Adriana mentioned, we felt that it was insufficient and did not fully represent the county's demographic makeup, and it did not sufficiently reflect leadership among organizations that focus on racial equity and social vulnerability. So back in September, we expanded our engagement with many community-based organizations focused on public health, racial equity and civil rights, and immigrant communities, seniors, low-income communities, to get a broader and more diverse perspectives to help shape the equity enhancing measures and to ground truth priority actions and identify any blind spots that we had. We also launched the Resilience Ambassadors program this past summer with 5 young adults in high school and college, which we designed with the same goal in mind. And these charts summarize the key issues and priorities that were identified. And I'm not going to go over all of them, but things like lack of financial resources, misinformation due to language barriers, being at the mercy of landlords, pedestrian bike safety, immigrant households' fear of being apprehended. Next, things like high utility costs, lack of health insurance, food insecurity, distrust of government. So you can see that there are a whole host of issues that might at first blush seem outside the realm of climate change, but in fact, climate change touches everything. And so we've really tried to convey throughout the CAP the need for integrated solutions that address climate change, equity, and the pressing quality of life issues faced by residents in their day-to-day lives.
Thank you, Doug. The plan has an entire section focused on climate hazards and climate vulnerability, and it identifies the county's 4 largest and growing climate hazards, and they are in this order: extreme heat, extreme precipitation, high winds, and drought. The plan analyzes the impact of climate hazards on a variety of community asset categories, including the built and natural environments, as well as people. And this is the concept of climate vulnerability. In the next several slides, we have some maps and figures of climate hazards and climate vulnerability that were developed for the plan. And within the plan, there are many more such figures. And also, I'd like to point you to Appendix C, which includes the entire climate vulnerability assessment report. With regards to heat projections, by the year 2100, county residents could experience almost 2 full months each year with temperatures reaching above 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And even by the year 2035, just 15 years from now, we can expect to experience an average of 12 days each year with temperatures reaching above 95 degrees, which is 3 times more than the county is experiencing today. The plan also includes some downscaled model that was done, looking at the global climate models and then downscaling them to the boundaries of Montgomery County. And with regards to extreme precipitation, it identifies that the 100-year rain event for the year 2100 would be equivalent as much as what a 151-year event is today. And with more frequent recurrence intervals, such as the 1-year, 2-year, and 10-year rain events, those are expected to have a somewhat smaller change in increased precipitation. We also, through this plan, began to combine climate hazard data, asset information, social vulnerability index to help us identify priority action areas. And this map here is looking at the 10-year precipitation event for the year 2050. And the red dots represent frequently flooded roads in the county, with the darker blue areas of the map showing the highest expected increases in nuisance or regular flooding. And also you can see in the shaded part of the map, that is a social vulnerability index showing the areas of the county that are considered to be the more vulnerable half of the county's population. The consultant team also analyzed projections for drought in the county. While mild drought conditions are projected to either decrease or stay the same, the annual risk of moderate, severe, and extreme drought is projected to increase significantly by the year 2100. And this map in particular shows the projected increase in the average number of months per year of severe drought. To reduce the risks and impacts associated with the county's primary climate hazards, the plan identifies 20 climate adaptation actions, and those include repairing and upgrading stormwater drainage and management systems, enhancing temperature and stormwater monitoring alerts, upgrading green streetscape and green infrastructure standards, hardening emergency shelters and installing resilience hubs, and updating floodplain maps.
So the other part of the plan deals with mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. And this slide here shows you the county's inventory that was done in 2018. We work with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments to do these inventories. And this is done using what's called the U.S. Community Protocol. So it measures the major Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions in the county. And you can see by this chart that the major emissions, not unexpectedly, are from buildings and transportation. So that's going to be our starting point in looking at greenhouse gas emission reduction opportunities. The next slide shows the magnitude of our challenge. The solid line at the top is what's called the business as usual projection, and that has a slight decrease, mostly due to expected changes in fuel economy of vehicles and some regional efforts to reduce travel in the region. But the real challenge is the dotted line, which is the county goals of 27 by 2027, reducing emissions by 80% and eliminating greenhouse gas emissions by 2035. So that's the magnitude of our challenge. The next slide shows the opportunities to reach that goal. And there's three major areas here, and I will go in each one of these areas in more detail in a minute. The blue reflects decarbonization, of the electric grid. The orange represents actions that can be done in the transportation sector, and the pink or reddish bars represent actions related to buildings. So a little more detail on these. On the grid decarbonization, our major strategies are around community choice energy and solar opportunities. Community choice energy, I'm sure you're familiar with, would allow the county to become the electricity supplier to residents and small businesses in the county, absent a renewable portfolio standard that helps us meet our goals of 100% reduction. This is the best next option for us to green our electricity supply. Won't be easy, but that's what we're pursuing now. There's legislation being introduced again in the General Assembly that we're hopeful will pass this year, and then we'll embark on launching a community choice energy program. On the transportation side, on the building side, there are really two categories we're dealing with here: existing buildings and new buildings. And our actions focus around making buildings as efficient as possible through building codes for new buildings and through incentives and requirements for existing buildings. One of the major efforts we're working on is our energy performance standards for existing buildings. This would be a requirement that buildings meet a certain performance standard over time. And electrification is also a key aspect of increasing reducing emissions from buildings. And of course, if you electrify buildings, you want to make sure your grid is decarbonized. So those two go hand in hand. I want to point out the pie chart at the bottom there. When people think about making buildings more efficient, they often think first of new buildings. And we are working on building codes to drive our new buildings toward net zero. But as this chart shows, the majority of our emissions come from existing buildings, which are already in place and will continue to be in place for a long time. And existing buildings, of course, are a little harder to tackle than new buildings. When you're starting from new, you can design the building as efficiently as possible. But new buildings, we have to figure out how to increase the efficiency and reduce emissions from a broad sector of buildings, both commercial and residential. So we're working on those programs now. The next sector is transportation. And again, two major strategies here. One is to change the way people travel. So passenger mode shift, more use of public transit, expanding active transportation, which is things like walking, biking. I always say taking a skateboard if that's your mode of choice. And then for those people who are in vehicles, making sure we switch those vehicles from fossil fuel powered vehicles to electric vehicles. And once again, making sure our electric grid is decarbonized. Then there's a sector, a wedge at the bottom of this that we haven't quite figured out. We need to do a little more work on. And these are emission sources like aviation, off-road vehicles, some industrial processes and refrigerants. We also have opportunities for sequestration strategies or offsets that we'll be looking at in the future to close that last wedge of emissions that we haven't completely figured out yet. So I mentioned that we use what's called the U.S. Community Protocol to measure our emissions. There are some emission sources that we don't measure in our inventory. These are the Scope 3 emissions that are consumption emissions and embodied carbon emissions. Consumption emissions are emissions that go into making the goods and materials that we use, the food we buy. And that can be a significant portion of our emissions. Embodied carbon emissions are emissions that are in buildings. So things like the making of concrete or steel. And both these sources of emissions can be large. A study by C40 Cities, which is a consortium of cities around the globe that are interested in tackling climate change, showed that for high-income areas, these emissions can be as significant as the Scope 1 and 2 emissions. So the CAP does include some discussion of these emissions, how we might measure them, and how we might go about reducing them. The next slide talks a little bit about some carbon sequestration actions that are discussed in the plan. We have 6 nature-based carbon sequestration recommendations related primarily to forests and trees, wetlands, increasing the carbon retention in soils, and improving agricultural practices, again, to retain carbon. So in addition to looking at the primary benefits of actions, that is their greenhouse gas reduction potential or the climate risk reduction potential, we also looked at co-benefits, secondary benefits, things like public health, environmental stewardship, economic prosperity, and of course, addressing racial equity and social justice. So each one of the actions were analyzed for these co-benefit areas. And the next several slides show a number of charts that are in the CAP that explain or that show the evaluations that we did in these areas. So Adrian, if you can just leaf through these next slides. Quickly, they're hard to see on the screen, so I won't spend time on them, but we have a slide that shows the risk reduction potential, the greenhouse gas reduction potential, and then shows the co-benefits of each action and how they stack up. And there's a chart in the CAP that we didn't include here because it would be very difficult to see that has an XY axis that shows on the x-axis the primary benefits of an action, and on the y-axis the secondary benefits. And we recognize that for some people the focus is solely on greenhouse gas reduction or solely on risk mitigation, but other people are interested in what are the economic impacts, or what are the health impacts, or what are the racial equity impacts of actions. And that table in the CAP that figure in the CAP will help people make judgments about what actions they think we should prioritize, and can result in some good discussions as we go forward with the implementation.
So the CAP also includes 16 actions related to governance, and this includes organizational structure and culture, staffing, technical capacity, as well as processes and decision-making that will, in many ways, sort of institutionalize climate change considerations and provide the foundation and the capacity to implement the CAP. And we've jump-started some of these actions already. This past spring and summer, we had in-depth climate change training for about 170 of the county's most senior officials, sort of a precursor to a climate academy. Climate ambassadors are now being designated, and OMB has started to embed climate considerations into the budgeting process. And I suspect Takoma Park might be interested in some of these things, and we'd be happy to share the approach we're using, for example, in the budgeting process. And once we figure out the training program for climate ambassadors, I would think we could open that up to. I haven't discussed this with my colleagues, but I suspect Takoma Park employees would be welcome to something like that. We could figure something out. I mean, there's a lot we can do on the governance side to leverage change. We need to set up an innovative financing workroom. I see that's a recommendation in the Takoma Park plan as well. Procurement is certainly ripe for leverage, incorporating green specifications and contract bids for products and services. Next. And we also have a public engagement partnerships and education education section. The success of the plan is based largely on the degree to which community members are actively engaged and participating in the efforts. And this is where we could partner with Takoma Park. I saw some of the actions in your plan that are like the renewable thermal community outreach campaign to promote heat pumps, for example. That seems like a promising area where we might be able to work together. There's so many areas where we could work together. The bottom line is we need to conduct a robust outreach campaign based on evidence and research, including elevating the importance of health in messaging, coordinate and amplify our efforts through some sort of communication coalition that we envision setting up. We really elevate and integrate racial equity into our community engagement and create a new entry points for residents to be involved. We had one meeting endeavoring to start to build a statewide coalition of like-minded jurisdictions to influence state climate policy. And I know that Gina joined us for one of those meetings. We had just one meeting, and hopefully we'll have some more in the future. We want to engage residents through the arts. So there's another perspective area where potentially we could partner. The upshot here is that we need to rethink the way we've traditionally conducted outreach and engagement, and to create resonance and spark broad scale action. We envision sort of co-creating these engagement efforts, working with community-based organizations, so that we're working with community members to identify barriers to action and tying climate work to their immediate quality of life and health issues. Thanks.
Thanks, Doug. The CAP also includes other sections, which we won't go into detail here, but it includes a number of recommendations for actions that people can take at the personal, household, and business level. The plan also references the proposed new general plan called Thrive Montgomery 2050. The timing of the general plan update, which overlaps with the drafting of the county's climate action plan, enables these two major planning efforts to coordinate with and complement each other. And the CAP also references the county's zero waste planning and initiatives. Implementing many of the actions in the climate action plan will require substantial financial resources. And we must recognize that county government resources alone are not sufficient to fully implement the CAP. Implementing the actions calls for commitment from both the public and private sectors while leveraging state and federal government resources. Further, the county will need to creatively pursue actions that provide multiple benefits in light of the constrained resources. And finally, I want to underscore that while the costs of implementing the CAP are high, costs of inaction on climate change will be even higher. While the climate plan is being finalized, the county continues to make progress on things that make sense to pursue immediately. And that includes, for example, advocating for a state bill on community choice energy. That is an action identifying the plan as having a very high impact in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We're also working on the adoption of the 2018 International Green Construction Code, as well as Stan mentioned a little bit earlier, we're in the process of developing a building energy performance standard for existing commercial multifamily buildings. This is another action that is identified in the plan as being a highly impactful action in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. There's a number of things happening in the transportation sector as well. For example, the Department of Transportation recently launched a flash bus service on US 29. I want to point out that fully 1/3 of the actions listed in the plan with regards to reducing greenhouse gas emissions are already underway or in the development stage. But on the other hand, implementing many of the CAP actions will require additional studies and analysis, developing new policies and programs, identifying funding and innovative financing, and having those tough conversations and finding political support and cooperation at the local, state, and federal levels. And finally, CAP actions may change as implementation begins, and new actions may be required over time. So our approach will need to be flexible. There are many ways to provide feedback on the climate action plan. On our climate webpage, which is listed here, there is a brief survey that you can fill out and leave your comments regarding this, what you find to be the strengths and weaknesses of the plan. And that survey is available in 7 languages. You can also participate in the Climate Action Plan Art Contest. And we've already received a number of amazing submissions, and we will be featuring a number of the entries in the final Climate Action Plan. We also launched just last week a virtual information room, which gives you an opportunity to interact with the plan in a fun and engaging way. And I have a screenshot of what that looks like in the next slide. You can also access the virtual information room from our climate website. And finally, if you have more extensive comments or any questions that you want to leave for us, you can feel free to reach out to us in our climate inbox. The email address is listed here. We will continue to host a number and participate in a number of virtual community events throughout the months of January and February. And those are listed in the upcoming events section of our page. We're excited to be planning for the Climate Youth Town Hall, which is scheduled for February 11th in the evening. The public comment period is currently open and will remain open through the end of February. And we anticipate releasing the final cap this spring. So to close, I'll leave you with an enticing image of the virtual information room. We encourage you to check it out. Not only does it go through the various sections of the plan, but it also has some of the entries that we've received from the climate art contest, pictures of the climate work groups, and a number of other resources that have been translated into 6 languages. So that concludes our presentation. I'll stop sharing.
Great, thank you very much, Adriana, Scott, or Stan, and Doug. I did look at the virtual presentation on the website, and it's pretty slick. I think people will have fun with that. I'll also just comment that the Takoma Park Mobilization Environment Committee is preparing comments on the draft plan, and so if people in Takoma Park have, especially we're looking for some of the technical analysis that we'd be welcome. We'd be happy to take your comments and aggregate those with ours. For tonight, we'll hold questions for the county representatives until after we have a presentation on the Takoma Park process, and then there'll be a few questions that we've already queued up for the speakers, and then we'll open it up to everybody on the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So without further ado, I will introduce our next speaker, who is our Mayor of Takoma Park, Kate Stewart. Kate recently began her second term as mayor. In her previous term, she championed both sustainability and climate action, and put through work to the successful enactment of the Takoma Park Climate Sustainability and Climate Action Plan resolution that was passed by the council in March at one of its very last in-person meetings. So I will turn it over to Mayor Kate.
Great. Thanks, David. And I just want to start by saying thank you to everyone for coming this evening and for putting this together. It's really important that we're all working together to fight climate change. And I have to say, I am incredibly excited about the fact that we're working hand in hand with the county on this. So Adriana, Stan, and Doug, thank you so much for being here with us on this Thursday evening. And I just want to acknowledge Gina Mathias, our sustainability manager, who you saw earlier, is here and knows the details of our plan probably better than anyone else. And then the second person who probably knows the details of our framework is my colleague, Councilwoman Dabala, who is on the call as well. And Councilmember Kovar is here because to fight climate change is an all hands on deck endeavor. And so I just want to recognize my colleagues and all the work they're doing. As David said, we passed our our climate emergency response framework in the very last meeting that we had in person in March. This climate response framework built on a lot of work that was prior to that, including our 2019 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, which was built on top of, and I see Seth Grimes joined us this evening, our sustainability plan from 2014 that he had a huge hand in. And so I always want to acknowledge the work that has gone on before, because we always stand on the shoulders of those who've come before us. So thank you to everyone. So basically, what is our 2020 climate emergency response framework layout? Really, it's two things to keep in mind. The framework establishes a goal of net zero emissions by 2035, and it calls on centering equity in program and policy implementation. So these two are overarching goals of equity and reaching net zero emissions by 2035 are need to be in sync as we're moving forward. Just as we heard with the county plan, we need to be working on both of these at the same time, because we're not going to create the sustainable community that we're working toward unless we keep both of these front and center. Specifically, our framework outlines a number of strategies to fight climate change and build resilience to changing climate by improving the energy efficiency of our buildings, decarbonizing our transportation and increasing walkability, preparing for a transition to renewably generated energy and electricity and heating and cooling, eliminating fossil fuels, and last but surely not least is making sure we maintain a healthy tree canopy. The framework also stresses cooperation and coordination with other levels of government to achieve that goal. And that's one of the reasons we're here this evening. And I want to say we also prioritize buildings and focusing on improving efficiency and reducing fossil fuels in existing buildings because we know that's going to be a long-term effort. And we need to start putting in place implementation plans as soon as possible to ensure that the city, homeowners, and businesses have the resources necessary to reach those goals. And in working towards our goals, we need a clear understanding of the impact we can have here in the city and what we need to do with others at the county, state, and regional levels. And this is one of the main reasons, as we said, we're here this evening. As we talked about before, I think as Adriana mentioned, or someone mentioned that the county, does the building codes. We come under the county building codes, so those are best done at the county level. We're working with Delegate Charkoudian on community choice energy. That's something that we need state action on. And we need regional work as well. And I know Councilman Dybala, as I mentioned, and Councilmember Kovar, and myself all are very active in the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, where we're working on these issues in a regional way with our colleagues. And we must also encourage and support efforts by individual residents and groups of residents and projects that many of you are working on around regenerative agriculture, food waste projects, and many other efforts. And we need to work together on all of these things if we're going to move forward to fight climate change. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming this evening, and I'm going to turn it over to Gina right now to dig into some of the specifics.
Great, thank you so much, Kate. So as we have heard from the county and heard from Mayor Stewart on the Takoma Park Climate Emergency Response Framework and the components of the framework, I wanted to transition to what we have in common with the county and our goals being the same. One of the things that struck me is our emissions inventory. And our inventories are not just simply downscaled from the county. We do have Takoma Park specific data that goes into our inventory analysis. And as you can see, the components of our emissions at the city level and at the county level are the same, in the same proportions. And so as we move forward in our work, I think we can be pretty confident that what the city needs to work on is what this county will be working on. And I have been trying to read the county plan to look at what we share in our framework and what we can count on the county to be working on, and think about what the city needs to be working on in order to support the county, what resources we can utilize, what we can let the county kind of handle for us so we don't have to spend city resources, and maybe what we can do to help the county if there are things that we could pilot for the county so it makes it easier for the county to adopt something as a whole. One of the things that I think comes right to mind is benchmarking in our buildings. And the county's been benchmarking for a number of years now. And this is something that we can use their model for benchmarking large scale buildings and scale it down at the city level for our smaller buildings that aren't covered by the county benchmarking law. And this is a great resource and a great way that we can take advantage of the groundwork and the work that the county has been doing for a number of years, and help it or use it to help us meet our net zero goals. Transportation is an issue that is going to be best addressed as a whole region. This is not something that Takoma Park is going to be able to solve to net zero emissions all on its own. We need the county and the region as a whole to be working on these things, but there are certain things that the city might be doing to move that along. One of the things that I think we've been doing at the exact same time, accidentally, is allowing people to now get car chargers in front of their house where there is no driveway. So curbside EV charging is now available for residents in the county and in Takoma Park. And I would love it to talk with the county team on one other things like that we can do at the same time and streamline those processes to make it easier for both of us. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I think that it would be a good time to go into our conversation with the county to start talking about who's going to do what and getting us to our 2035 goals. And I have some questions already coming in and some questions of my own to kick off a panel discussion with the county and with Mayor Stewart. And that first question I just need to pull up here is, what role do the municipalities play in the county's plan? I think I would love to hear what specific actions the county might be looking for municipalities to take, and in particular, Takoma Park.
Thanks, Gina. I can get that discussion started. So one thing I would say is that, the magnitude of this problem requires an all hands on deck approach. It's our, combating climate change is our collective responsibility. We all have to be pushing the accelerator button, pedal, however that phrase goes. Nobody can afford to kind of sit back and kind of wait for others to, take the lead. But there's certainly opportunities to kind of participate, partner, work together to get this work done. I think that municipalities, including Takoma Park, can absolutely, play a role in partnering with us, and in many instances, we're already doing that. And in fact, implementing many of the actions in the climate action plan will necessitate municipalities taking action, at the local level. For example, the building energy performance standard, which we'll be introducing before council in the next month or two, would also need to be implemented, or, those ordinances would need to be passed at the local level in order for those requirements to also apply at the municipalities. For each of the 87 actions that are identified in the plan, we have taken an initial stab at identifying the lead or co-lead, as well as the contributing, agencies, departments, and entities. And so there are several actions that have already identified municipalities as partners. It includes some actions in the transportation section, and in the climate adaptation section, in the governance and the public engagement. But when I went back and looked at that list, I definitely think we've undercounted, and definitely need to go back in and add municipalities in many more actions, particularly in the building sector section, as well as in many more actions in the public engagement section of the plan.
Okay, so for example, with the building energy performance standards, Takoma Park would need to actually adopt that. It wouldn't just automatically apply to the buildings in the city?
So the building energy performance standards are going to be incorporated into county code. So in the same chapter with the benchmarking law. And so to the extent that the city has adopted that section of the county code, it would automatically apply in the city.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have, depending upon as you guys probably know, depending upon the section of the code, various municipalities opt in and opt out. And so That is one thing we'll have to do. So building energy performance standards is a good example. We'll have to work with not only Takoma Park, but Rockville and Gaithersburg and many of the smaller municipalities if that law is to apply in those jurisdictions.
Okay. Yeah, that's really good to know. Do you know right now what specific resources might be available to municipalities? Will there be specific incentives that building owners might be able to take advantage of, things like that?
So we're working as part of our BEPS program. We're working on the carrots that go along with the stick. And our vision would be that those would apply in municipalities as well as outside municipalities. So things, for example, the financing programs the Montgomery County Green Bank might offer, as an example. Those are applicable within cities as well as within the county. We're working, the District of Columbia is working on implementing their BEPS program, and they've set up what's called a Building Innovation Hub, which is a resource for building owners to get information about things they can do to improve their buildings, access to financing and incentives. And we're talking to them about creating that hub on a regional basis so that it applies across the region, because property owners and energy services companies don't confine themselves to one particular jurisdiction. They work across borders. So to the extent we can share that information and share resources and programs, that makes it easier for building owners and energy providers to offer services. So that's another example of a carrot we're working on offering.
Great. This question might be harder to answer right now, but I'm wondering if there are specific policies or programs that might be counterproductive for Takoma Park to pursue.
I can't think of any. I feel that, if you're ready to take action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, I don't think you should hold back. If you're ready, keep moving forward. I think we need to make those reductions as quickly as possible.
Gina, if I may ask a follow-up question, because our city council this Saturday will be doing our priority setting for the next year, and then we go into our budget, much like the county does. But we can move a little faster at the local level. And I know you said in the CAP report, it identified places municipalities can plug into. I think Liz mentioned in the chat, there weren't any of those actions that municipalities could lead on. But if you're thinking about what's something that, as Gina mentioned, would be a good pilot or something for us to really move quicker on, maybe to help either push the county or do some things. Is there any area that you see as we're discussing our plan and the county's plan that we should focus on?
Doug, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, because you had done a crosswalk earlier today of the Takoma Park plan, and you had identified a couple of options. So why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, the two things that jumped out for me, one of which I mentioned, was the renewable thermal community outreach campaign and your effort to promote heat pumps and then sort of aggregated purchasing to drive down the price. That sounds like something that would be, if you were to take the lead on that and the county could support and we could then replicate, that seems like a win-win. I mean, Stan's more of an expert on this stuff than I am, and so I'll let him chime in. But the other thing I saw that sounded appealing is the virtual, power purchase agreement. And if I understood it correctly, is that sort of similar, Gina, to what you guys did with the aggregated rec purchase? And if so, that seems like those two things seem pretty appealing. But Stan, I'll defer to you and on that.
Well, those are community outreach campaigns, so those would fall under the programs. And yeah, the community outreach or the community choice the aggregate for RECs was really because we can't have community choice energy. So hopefully we won't be doing that voluntary program again. But I'm happy to if we need to, if we don't get that community choice energy bill passed.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would say as to reinforce what Doug said and also what Mayor Stewart said about this is all hands on deck. So one of the biggest challenges I think we all realize we face is is making sure everybody in the community, whether you're in the city of Takoma Park or outside the municipality, understands the role they play in that. So to the extent that a program like Doug highlighted, the heat pump program, if there's a way that's effectively communicated that works, and maybe working on that in a smaller audience like you have in Takoma Park, and figuring out what works and what doesn't work, and we'd be happy to work with you on that. But if we can test it in Takoma Park, and then find out what works and expand that broadly, that would be a help, I think. Some of these things are hard to launch countywide, or you would like to not launch them countywide until you have them really fine-tuned, and sometimes that's hard. You go out and your first effort falls short, and then you have to retool. So to the extent that we can do things and understand what works and what doesn't, and then expand it across the county, I think that would be very helpful. So I'm sure there's lots of opportunities to do that. And I think the county would be we'd certainly be more than happy from a staff working together on that, whether we have funding or not. That may be a fight, because I know we're all looking for funding. So, but I'm sure, again, if it furthers the county's efforts, let's have those discussions.
Great. Kate, did you have any other thoughts at the moment, or should we shift into the public questions?
No, I have some other things, but I know the public has been putting a lot of things in chat, so let's go there. All
right. So I'm going to turn it over to David to moderate with the public discussion.
Well, thank you, all of you, and thanks everybody for putting in the questions. So some of these I think have already been addressed, but as I look across the questions and just think about this whole thing, there seem to be at least three types of barriers to moving forward. One is inertia. That whether it's inertia that we always do things, we need new policies, etc. Another barrier is technology, which is addressed a little bit in the report, but is perhaps making assumptions about technology availability in terms of electrification. And then the third is a financial barrier. And so there are a couple questions in terms of innovative approaches for financing, revolving funds. We have the county green bank, and some of the recommendations within the clean energy working group that I was on talked about piloting different ways of shifting financing, whether it's moving money from or taking back money that we're paying on our utility bills that are going into the general funds and putting that back into building efficiency and things like that. So could you, I guess, probably for each of you to just talk about creative, given that money is always going to be tight, creative ways of financing and helping cities, but also helping individual residents, whether they're homeowners or renters, to deal with the upfront costs?
I would say that one of the fortunate things is that we're not starting from scratch here. The county already has some financing tools in place that are available, readily available to be used. So one is the CPACE, the Commercial Property Assessed the Clean Energy Program, which allows businesses and residential, well, actually it's just businesses. That's where the C comes in, commercial. But to pay for clean energy installations and energy efficiency improvements using the tax bill, it allows the payback on that upfront. Instead of having to pay it all at once, you can pay it back over many years. As you mentioned, David, we also have the Montgomery County Green Bank, which is another financing tool, and it has offerings for both commercial entities as well as residential, as well as the county already has experience with tools such as PPAs, power purchase agreements, and has used that tool extensively to finance solar installations on public facilities, for instance. So We won't need to start from scratch. We just need to build on and expand these types of financing tools that we already have in our tool belt.
One thing I just want to add to that is that the Green Bank will be taking over as administrator of our CPACE program, which is an improvement we're really excited about, because again, it gives the opportunity for a building owner to go to one place and get information about various options they might have. So CPACE might work very well for some building owners and not for others, but the Green Bank has other tools they can provide. So having all that in one place, as opposed to having to go to different places, is going to be, I think, a boon to those programs. One of the things, again, on the communication side that we found, and the Green Bank has found in doing some pilot work, is that it's, for many building owners, it's just a lack of understanding of what their options are, how to access experts, how to pay for projects once they're identified. And even if you help someone go through that process, getting across the finish line and actually getting a project in place is difficult. So the more you can streamline that for a building owner, the better off we are. And again, our work with DC to try to make programs consistent across the borders to the greatest extent we can. We're going to have some challenges because they're a different jurisdiction, they're subject to different laws and funding sources. But to the extent we can make things as similar as possible, that will help ease some of the struggles building owners have.
And just to follow up on that, on the Takoma Park level, could Kate or Gina talk a little bit more about the idea of bulk purchases to help owners of buildings and perhaps owners of vehicles to make bulk purchases to increase their efficiency and reduce their emissions, increase adaptability, maybe even bulk purchases of trees, for example, which I think actually exists in Takoma Park.
Mm-hmm. That's neat. So the county already has in place a solar purchasing co-op. I believe it just finished its 4th or 5th cohort recently, and that has been a very successful program to help residents purchase solar for their roofs at a discounted price through the power of bulk purchasing. We're exploring piggybacking on that same concept for electric vehicles to enable county residents to participate in an electric vehicle group buy and to be able to access electric vehicles at a discounted rate. We issued a request for information in the fall, received a number of written responses, and are parsing through that with the hopes of launching the first such EV group buy program in the county by the end of this fiscal year, basically between now and June of this year. So stay tuned.
One of the things that Takoma Park is doing currently is we are working with a consulting group who is providing services to 3 multifamily buildings. And so they're able to provide a monitoring and optimization project for all 3 buildings at a lower cost. The city is offering that as a grant currently, since it's a pilot project, but we've already seen one of the buildings have a 20% savings in their utility costs over the course of the past year. And I expect with some additional improvements to the buildings, there'll be additional savings coming in the following year. And it's a really simple monitoring and optimization of their HVAC, heating and cooling, and mechanical systems in the buildings, things like monitoring their hot water settings. And this also improves the resident, the occupant experience in the buildings, and improves quality of life for residents, because now the water in one building was scalding in one part of the building, and it was a dangerous situation, and now that's under control. And so it's a little bit different than group buying, but it's a way that the city can leverage its money to help make energy efficiency improvements and get costs lower to do that, where it would be more expensive if a building owner was trying to do this all on their own individually.
Mm-hmm. And I think, David, the example Gina just gave also shows, and I think that might have been in some of the questions too, the intersection between our climate work and our housing work in the city, because it's very important that they go hand in hand. And that was one of the things I see Councilmember Kovar nodding his head, because he was a big proponent of this when we were talking about the framework and making sure that as we discuss our strategies moving forward, that our housing work and our climate work really do go hand in hand with each other. And so I think the example Gina just gave is actually a really good one of how we're bringing those two areas together.
Thank you. So one of the questions in the chat is somebody is planning to do an upgrade of their aging natural gas heating and hot water and converting to a heat pump. So I guess two questions. One is maybe my question is, where do we get the information about what are our technical options and technology options? And second, if financing is potentially coming, should people be waiting for a little bit before they make those upgrades?
So just to your second question, financing is already available from the Green Bank. They do have a residential program that can offer financing at better rates than someone can likely get in the commercial market. So I would encourage them to look at the Green Bank and talk to them about financing. The technical part is, I'd say, remains a challenge. I mean, there are resources out there. I've been looking myself at a high efficiency heat pump, and it's been a real eye-opening experience for me, because I've had a couple contractors come in and give me quotes to do that, and I've gotten vastly different answers from those contractors, and I'm someone who knows some of the questions to ask, and so it's really made me realize that for an average homeowner who is looking to do this, how much trust they have to place in a contractor, which sometimes is difficult to do because you're not so sure you're getting the right information. So I think this is one of the education areas that we're going to really have to work on and try to find the tools that best convey information and from what's considered to be a trusted source, as opposed to people feeling like they have a contractor who's trying to sell them on their specific technology or approach.
So on both the financing and technology, what are the opportunities in terms of working with our local educational institutions, Montgomery College, University of Maryland, and potentially others?
So when it comes to the education actions in the plan, particularly relating to embedding climate change education in the curriculum and professional development on climate change for teachers, we worked hand in hand with MSCPS staff to develop and finalize those recommendations or those actions. And so, and in fact, they've been great partners throughout the entire climate planning process. And are rearing to go. Some of the education actions require state level policy changes, from the Maryland State Department of Education, because the curriculum is set at the state level, not at the county level. But I feel really good about these relationships that we've established with school staff, and think they will only grow as we move forward towards the plan implementation.
I think part of the question also that was on there was in terms of extension like education, that the University of Maryland is a land grant institution and provides a lot of extension in many ways that we're probably not well aware of. And again, I think that's something that is coming up as an opportunity to help in this informal education as well.
Absolutely. And we do have a couple of actions in the public engagement section of the plan that speak to that, and those partners that can help educate the community on climate change outside of the classroom. Libraries is another great partner. Some of the key leadership within the Department of Libraries recently went through a climate change training series. They were among a cohort of about 170 county staff who participated in that. And I think it was kind of an eye-opening experience for them. And they've really began to kind of explore, what are some of the ways that they can take a leadership role in educating the community about climate change.
And then one more, and kind of related, and then I want to switch a bit, but also clearly there are some economic opportunities with local contracting firms that can help people to make these conversions, whether it's in a commercial or a residential building, and wondering, is that a role that a city should be playing? Is that a role that the county should be playing? Is that a role that Montgomery County should be playing in terms of providing the technical training for the people who are already involved in contracting and may want to get involved in contracting, so that they, as part of their business, can be providing these cleaner energy and efficiency services?
Well, I would say there's been work in that area both by utilities and by the Green Bank, where both those entities have partnered with contractors to make sure they understand incentives or financing that might be offered by whether it's a utility or the Green Bank. And so that approach to use contractors as part of your outreach team, I think is well adopted now. I do think, again, some of the concern that people will still have with that, even if a contractor has that stamp of approval from a utility or from the Green Bank, individuals want to feel like they're going to a trusted, unbiased source, and a contractor, you might always feel has some, they're invested in getting you to use their product. And so trying to strike that balance between having contractors who can be a good source of information, but also where someone can go to check on the information they're getting and learn on their own, I think is going to be a part of our challenge.
Takoma Park did a neighborhood energy challenge 6 years ago. And I think that model worked really well for us, where we worked with and qualified contractors who had a good reputation and met specific criteria set by the city to provide home energy audits and home performance installation measures, insulation and HVAC improvements. And on top of that, I offered to review anyone who wanted their energy audit report and the proposed scope of work from the auditing firms as an unbiased third party to help people make sense of their reports, make sense of the recommendations, and let them know if the pricing seemed average, if the recommendations seemed like they were worthwhile, or if they were being sold. And that model, I think, helped residents in the city feel more comfortable with making some of these improvements and investing thousands of dollars into their homes during this energy challenge. We had, I think, 20% of our homes got energy audits by the end of the challenge. And a significant number of those ended up investing thousands of dollars into their home performance, getting insulation and HVAC systems and water heaters. So it would be great to see if the county could offer something like that. I know it's much harder when you have 1 million people versus 17,000. I
thought you were volunteering.
It was hard for me to keep up with. And we only have 3,500 homeowners in the city, or homes in the city. So I don't know what kind of scaling that might take to do at the county level, but it really does help people navigate that whole process and feel more comfortable with the work they're getting done and the investments they're making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as somebody who did it, I will say it made it so much less painless. And Douglas, as you were mentioning before, when you I think, Stan, you mentioned this when you were looking at a heat pump, and the right questions to ask. I think that's one of the things that we do hear from residents is they don't even know where to begin to do this work and to think about it. So I'm glad to see both in the Takoma Park plan and in the county plan, a lot of emphasis on outreach and community engagement. But I will say, I think, as Gina just outlined, the model we had for the home energy challenge worked really well.
I do think the contractor engagement, and I saw this in the chat too, is so important. And having at least a list of contractors who've been through an education course on high performance homes, high performance buildings, because I know unless I was doing what I do, I wouldn't even know how to find a contractor who could help me find a cold weather heat pump. And I've had contractors in my home recently badger me about wanting to go electric with my water heating and say things to me. So it's, would like to help people do that.
Yeah. One of the things that we launched with the assistance of Takoma Park, as well as other municipalities and a number of other partners a few years ago, is Montgomery Energy Connection, which is a website where people can go get information about a whole variety of things related to energy use. If you're concerned about paying your bills, there's information about energy assistance. There's information about renewables there, information about upgrades you can do. So that was a start. I think it's a very nice website. You can put in your address and find incentives that are available to you. So that's growing that website or things like that. Again, to be viewed as a trusted source of information, I think is one of our important strategies in implementing the plan.
Thank you. I think that this is very helpful in terms of just thinking about getting to the nuts and bolts and how this is implemented on the scale. I want to switch and go back to an earlier question that is, I think, really a pivotal question that both the city and the county have racial equity and justice at the core of the programs. Obviously much easier said than done. And so the specific question is, does the county have a racial equity or impact evaluation methodology that might be applied by the city or piloted by the city, or how could the city and county work together to put the great intentions into reality?
So the county has a relatively new Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice. The director is Tiffany Ward. And as she has been, standing up that group, those are the very things that she has been actively working on. The council recently passed a requirement that bills, including budget items that go before council, must include a racial equity review. And so those are things that she is already actively doing. So I'm sure she'll be able to share, her methodology and approach that she's been using.
And I think clearly the first thing we've realized is that we have to have more conversations with the diverse population in Montgomery County. We did not have enough representation going through our planning process to fully understand what all the issues are. So the first step is just trying to expand our outreach to get more diverse voices in the conversation.
And just so for folks know, we've had conversations with Tiffany, I think the day after she got appointed to make sure she knows that Takoma Park has a strong commitment to this and to think about how, just like we're having this conversation, how on the racial equity piece, we can also partner with the county and as they're operationalizing the equity piece of all this work. So.
And if I may say something along those lines, the part of the county plan that talks about equity within different areas of the county, I at least will be taking a closer look at that to see what it suggests for Takoma Park, and I think the reverse is true.
And just we're thinking through sort of organizational development, creating some sort of entity that a body of representatives, whether it's a task force, a racial equity and climate task force, or some sort of program to think this through with us in an ongoing way, or at sort of the conceptual discussion point. But we could bring you into those discussions ultimately as we move forward.
So I have a question. I know we've worked with the county very recently on how the county, one of the resources that's been made available to us is getting a cutout of data the county was already working on developing. So I worked with Doug on asking to have a cutout of the impact of the urban forest canopy on our climate emissions and understanding what the actual value of our urban canopy is as it relates to our emissions. And the county was going through a project to do this countywide and is kind enough to make sure that Takoma Park and Rockville get our city cutouts so we can have our own numbers. And I'm wondering if there's something like that for the equity work that the county's been doing so that we can have a clearer picture of Takoma Park as it relates to the county.
So we have been relying on the Centers for Disease Control Social Vulnerability Index, and it includes 15 factors, including households that speak English less than well, single parent households, families with high energy burden, and we have maps of what are the areas of high social vulnerability mapped out for the county, and so I think that would be something definitely willing to share whatever the GIS layers are that we have. In any of those data sources.
That would be really, really wonderful.
This is great. I feel like we're sitting in on the conversation among the people who need to be talking with each other about how do we actually make these things happen. I want to ask a question just in terms of the report itself, that with these 57 actions and they're in different action areas, they're numbered. Adriana, could you talk about the prioritization, and are these items, are these options? Is this a menu? Is this the everything that needs to be done? Sort of just kind of give us a little framing about all of that.
Sure. These are all the things that we need to be done. So it is a bit daunting, having those 87 action items. It is not a menu of options to pick and choose from. We need to do all of those and likely even some more that we haven't even thought of in order to reach our climate goals. Where the identification of county authority to implement and feasibility and cost comes in, is that it just really allows us to have some tough conversations around what are the priorities of the political leadership, where is the really low hanging fruit, what is the relative greenhouse gas impact of tackling the low hanging fruit versus the other things, and so it just those data points are intended to be helpful for decision making, but ultimately, between now and 2035, we are going to have to tackle, all of those things on that are on that list and check them all off.
Okay, well, that's quite helpful. So, turning to the next steps. So, I guess two-part question. One is, it's open for public comment through the end of February. What types of comments will be most useful to you and others on the county level? And then talk us through the process after February 28th, both in terms of revisions of the plan and really what everybody's most, I think, asking about is how do we turn if we have to do all these 87 things, we have to be, we have to be implementing these in immediate time. What's the connection with the county executive and with the county council in terms of bringing the policies that need to be adopted legislatively and the policies that can be adopted administratively?
Okay. That was a multi-part question, so I'll try to keep it all in mind.
Yeah. So one is types of comments that are useful now, yeah. And then the second part is what's next and how do we help in that?
Yeah, I would say constructive comments are helpful. What did we miss? And and how should we reframe it or update it or change it? Are there any data sources that you recommend us using? I mean, obviously we appreciate kudos. Don't be shy on those, but we really want substantive comments. If you don't believe that the climate is changing, and there are some in our community who have reached out to us saying, prove to me that the climate is changing. We feel like the plan already does that. We feel like there's many other sources out there that do that. So that is not really helpful to us at this stage. So we're anticipating, hundreds of comments coming in between now and the end of the public comment period, and we will need a little bit of time to digest those and synthesize those, and then figure out, what can be incorporated, and then to do that process of incorporating those edits. So we do anticipate finalizing the plan this spring. But David, as you mentioned, kind of time keeps rolling on. The budget for fiscal year 22 is currently in development, and so even prior to the plan being finalized, those discussions are already taking place about, even in this kind of dire fiscal scenario, what are some of the county resources that could be put to use to help continue the implementation process in fiscal year 22. So the county executive himself, will be reviewing and weighing in. And then as we did, just like we did this current fiscal year, for each upcoming year, we're going to be issuing a work plan of climate initiatives to give the public a sense of, what are the things that we have on our lineup for the coming year.
And for the things that need legislative action, what's the process in working with the county council to develop initiatives that need to be approved by the legislative body?
So we've the first big piece of legislation that will be coming before the county council, early this year, is the Building Energy Performance Standard. Mm-hmm. That is going to be a big deal. We've already had a preliminary briefing for all of the council members individually about, what it is, give them a heads up that it's coming. But that is an area where we're really going to be needing a lot of community support to make sure that bill passes. I think it's very easy to say at a conceptual level that, we're going to take climate action, but kind of the buck starts stopping when people start seeing, what are the implications of implementing something like a building energy performance standard. It is a heavy lift. It will require building owners to implement thousands or tens of thousands of dollars of improvements to their buildings over a relatively long period of time, but there is a cost involved. And so, all of that needs to be taken into consideration. And we expect that there will be some opposition to it.
Things like equity issues and affordable housing and those kind of things. Once as Adriana says, once we start to really delve into the details, you realize how many nuances there are to it. And so we're trying to work through those things now. And
then I guess I'll turn to Kate for a similar question in terms of the city. So you have the framework. There are two council members who are on who obviously have great interest and expertise in this. So what are you seeing in the next steps in terms of going from the framework resolution to budgeted items and potentially new policies and ordinances in the city?
Yeah, so we were glad to be able to schedule this meeting today because on Saturday, as I mentioned before, the council holds its priorities meeting for the year where we go through our priorities, and we have a whole section dedicated to our climate change work. I think we set really ambitious goals for ourselves back in March. And unfortunately, because of COVID-19, much of the work had to be shifted. And so we're looking forward to the council to hearing from Gina on Saturday on what work she's been able to do under COVID, and then to think about what we can prioritize moving forward. And we'll have that conversation on Saturday. And then we were talking about at the county level, we'll be starting our budget process and then figuring out what we can budget for this upcoming year. So I think that's our process moving forward. The priorities meeting is a public meeting. People can watch it on all the same channels and ways that they can watch our weekly city council meetings. And we will then, at a city council meeting, review the priorities we set after Saturday. So there'll be plenty of opportunity for members of the public to also weigh in on that before we even get to the budget process. And then, of course, when we're in the budget process, there's always opportunities for the public to weigh in. And Gina, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I wanted to let everybody know that this is just the first in a series of community sessions or meetings on Takoma Park's climate action. And so the next one you can expect to be the first week of February, and I will send out an announcement on that exact date. And that meeting will be more directly related to what Takoma Park's going to undertake in 21 and 22 in terms of climate policies that we can present to the city council, and looking at what the implementation implications might be in different regards as laid out in our framework. And we'll have a third session the last week of February. So we will have more upcoming meetings very soon. Takoma Park is going to be giving Montgomery County formal comments on the draft climate action plan. And so we will be putting those together. I would love people's input on helping us formulate our formal comments that will go to Montgomery County by February 28th. And I think that we have some great points here on where we can already begin action or continue actions that we've already been working on pursuing a community outreach campaign with the assistance of Montgomery County on heat pumps, looking at contractor education and how we can kickstart that. We don't want to wait too long on that. And finally, I expect that I will be presenting to City Council in June or July with some implementation options for the city. So keep an eye out for that agenda that will be upcoming. And I want to just thank everybody for being here tonight. David, I don't know if you have closing remarks that you'd like to make.
Actually, I forgot one thing. We need to pass CCE. Sorry. I can't believe it. Honestly, yes. We need to pass community choice energy. Over the next couple of weeks and everything, that really needs to be our priority. It's a council priority here in the city. I know it's a county priority. If you, particularly as Delegate Charkoudian tells us all the time, if you have friends or people who live in other places outside of like Takoma Park and places that you know are already expressing support for this, please call them and have them write an email to their delegate state senator to support CCE. That really needs to be a huge focus right now of our advocacy. Sorry.
Thank you. And I'll just maybe close by giving an update on that, because the Mobilization Environment Committee and others have been very engaged in that. District 20 Delegate Charkoudian has been the champion of this legislation. The legislation that will be introduced tomorrow will create a pilot in Montgomery County that will enable the county to adopt and implement community choice energy. The legislation has been unanimously endorsed by the Montgomery County delegation, and that's the House delegation. It's a big step forward in terms of enactment. It will still have to go through a committee hearing in the Economic Matters Committee, but the committee does give a lot of deference to the local representatives, and then it has to be enacted by the full House of Delegates, which again, they'll give a lot of deference, but that doesn't mean we take it for granted. And then at that point, it will then go to the state Senate, and the process will be for the Montgomery County state senators to then weigh in on their support for the bill. I did talk yesterday with the Chief of Staff for Senator Brian Feldman from Montgomery County, who is leading that in the Senate, and she says, hold off on contacting the senators right now because there's nothing we can do. Get it through through the House, and then get it going with the Senate. But we do need to watch that because in the draft analysis, that community choice energy is the #1 emission reduction in terms of its effectiveness. So we still have about 40 people on after 90 minutes. So I want to just thank everybody for your activism and your engagement, and keep working with us on the activists and through Mobilization Environment Committee and other approaches, and through the official processes that our elected and staff people have provided to us. So thanks everybody. This is, I think, very encouraging to see how things are moving forward. So have a great evening.
Thank you.